I'm delighted to introduce Rhanor Gillette to our group today. Rhanor is Emeritus Professor of Molecular and Integrative Physiology and a member of the Neuroscience program. And he has committed his career, his life to understanding why we do what we do. In other words, the neural basis of behavior. And behavior, of course, is one of the targets of understanding for our training grant. And so we're bringing him in the context of understanding behavior. Rhanor, as an alum, he got his undergraduate degree at the University of Miami. He did a master's degree at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu, and his PhD at the University of Toronto in Canada. And then he was a postdoc at the University of California at Santa Cruz. Some of you I know there are many of his former students happen to be trainees or visiting today. But he spends part of each year in the seashore. There's a pattern here. Sometimes at Stanford University's Marine Biological Lab at Hopkins in the Pacific Grove, and sometimes at the University of Washington's Marine Lab at Friday Harbor. And if you ever get a chance to visit either of those places, I encourage you to do so. Some of the work he did today, he's going to talk about today, he did at the Stazione Zoologica in Naples, Italy. And some of it was at the Marine Biological Station at Bagnols-sur-Mer in southern France, also on the Mediterranean. And I think he'll tell you how he got inspired by going to those marine labs. So thank you, Rhanor.
Oh, thank you, Martha. I really didn't mean to dedicate my life to understanding how we worked, but I was just doing some interesting things and it popped up. So here we are. I'm really honored to be able to address this class on miniature brain machinery, because I think your field has a great potential, and I'm really interested to watch what happens in the area and see how far you get, because I think that the sorts of things that we're doing are quite related to what you might do in establishing complexity in the brain machinery, and perhaps getting some very interesting behavior out of it. Now, this is going to be a progress report, okay? And based on the fact that while we were working on this animal, over quite a few years, we began to describe the neural circuitry that turned out to underlie basic economic decision. What is a basic economic decision? It's whether you approach or avoid a stimulus. Okay, that is economy. And this is the decision, the kind of decision that you make in every situation in your social affairs, on Wall Street, and so forth. And we were lucky enough to show in this animal, in that very simple sea slug, how it was regulated by sensation, by internal state, and reward learning. And we worked on this animal. This is a predatory sea slug. It's a generalist and opportunistic predator. Its name is Pluribranchia californica. It lives, of course, in California at great depths. We go to a lot of trouble to obtain it. But it has a very simple behavior, and it has a very simple nervous system. And the reason it survives so well is it has a really potent chemical defense. If it's annoyed, it secretes sulfuric acid. Nobody wants to eat this animal or attack it in any way. So it has the luxury of surviving and being very active with only a very simple set of behaviors, the elemental behaviors, and a very simple nervous system, which means that it was very accessible to experimental dissection. So we are at the point now where we'd like to know, we know all the circuitry, we know all the important circuitry for this animal, how it makes a decision, how it decides to approach something and go away from it. And we came to the point where we decided, how can we take this circuitry we know and model more complex behavior, as may have happened in evolution? How far can we go? So I'm going to talk about two subjects. At 90%, I'm going to talk about the first target, the goal-directed behavior in this animal that we'd like to embellish for sociality and creativity and complex, the whole complex idea of consciousness, if you will. I don't mean to be arrogant or audacious, but yes, I do. And then what we'd like to do at some point after this, we'd like to really come up with motor control that can be tuned to the circumstance. It can be tuned as it is tuned during embryogenesis and development, as the child learns to walk, as it learns it's about its environment. And that's a distant goal, but we think it may be attainable. So let's see what you think, okay? These are the animals we work with. Pleurodbranchia, it's an opportunistic sea slug. It's here it is at about 60 feet below the surface down in La Jolla Shores off of San Diego. And then we also work on this octopus, the little octopus rubescens. It's a miniature species, huge personality, just totally fun, pretty darn smart, we think, whatever being smart is. What is intelligence? We don't know, but we like to use the word just like you do. It seems intelligent, and it seems to know where it is. It has good eyes, and it can detect texture very carefully, very, very, very acutely with its arms and the little suckers on its arms, with which it also tastes. Okay, so it's quite a complex animal with a very large nervous system. However, I have to tell you that we worked for so many years on the sea slug and learned so much about it. And when I finally got an octopus and worked with the behavior and then looked at the nervous system, I realized that I look at it as if it is a sea slug. It's got all the basic attributes of the sea slug and its nervous system and its behavior, its behavioral integration, but it has added complex exteroceptors like eyes, the suckers, and a bit of the brain that gives it a very complex self-awareness and episodic memory. We'll get into that a little further. And these are the other two major model systems in the laboratory, senior graduate student Colin Lee and Katya Griptova, postdoc. And of course, we are funded, thank God, by the ONR for doing soft-bodied robotics, mainly concerned with the octopus, which I don't know how life could get any more fun. So let's look at the requirements. If we're putting together a model that is capable of complex behavioral autonomy, what would we like to have? I think self-awareness. What is self-awareness? You can get self-awareness just by internally integrating what you know of yourself, all you feel about your body, with a representation of the external world. Okay, this gets you to the level of a self-driving car. Okay, but what we add to that is what we like to call cognition. I'm going to give you a very, very strict definition of cognition. It is goal-directed use of knowledge. I want you to internalize that, because most people use the word and they really don't define it, and they don't define it very well if they do. And what you do with cognition is you integrate sensation, internal state, and memory of experience, and you use that to make decisions in your goal-directed use of knowledge. And reward learning and motivation that allows you a hedonic organization of behavior. What do we think of hedonism? Pleasure, pain. Well, let's not go for pleasure. Let's just say that instead of pleasure, let's just satisfy our urges like hunger, and then we don't have to think of sybaritic peeling grapes and so forth. Okay, so and then we'd also like specific attentional mechanisms under the control of goal-directed motivational processes, so we can focus on things and not be perturbed by a lot of external stimuli that may not be important. And these processes are very widely spread in the animal kingdom. The sea slug has them. Very, very simple animals have them. So they're not just possessed by what we think of as higher mammals. So let's talk about the variety of memory and types of consciousness, if we're going to do that. Okay, that'll be fun, right? And I'm going to introduce a model that was proposed by Integrative back in the 80s. He's still around. He's a very, very prominent psychologist. And I think what he put together, his synthesis, is very useful. And he defined 3 kinds of consciousness that go with the 3 recognized systems of memory that we see. And there are 3 memory types: procedural, maybe you've heard this before, procedural, right? Like riding a bike; semantic, knowing things about things. You know, like a vertical thing is like a tree, don't bump into it. An episodic memory, can we remember the past and be apprehensive about the future? Okay, that's what we've got. They correspond to the 3 kinds of consciousness, which being a Greek scholar, described as anoetic, noetic, and autonoetic. Anoetic meaning not knowing. Noetic is knowing, and autonoetic, knowing oneself. Okay, and really, what we're taught, these are put together with procedural memory. Procedural memory, like we get from classical conditioning and instrumental training, riding a bike, and with the anoetic organization, which really corresponds to an animal whose experience is entirely immediate. It doesn't probably remember the past or worry about the future. It's just reacting to what's going on. It's like you, if we completely decerebrate you. All right? We're not going to. And semantic memory, corresponding with the noetic consciousness, and the autonoetic with episodic memory. Episodic memory allowing you to reconstruct the past, to remember past events, and use your knowledge to predict the future. So, procedural memory and noetic consciousness is bound to the current situation, like the sea slug. We have no indication that the sea slug is remembering its babyhood or worrying about what's going to happen. It's just reacting to immediate stimuli. I smell food. Is there a potential mate in the vicinity? Something is trying to eat me. I should escape. And semantic memory, noetic consciousness gives ideas about the relationships among objects and events. It provides meaning without import, without knowledge of consequence. It holds no sense of personal time or affective context. And episodic memory and corresponding with autonoetic self-knowing consciousness, it reflects your personal experience. It deals with the past and the future. If we mess it up with a brain injury, it disrupts the awareness of time, both the future and past. We use it for remembering events with conscious awareness. In development, it appears rather late. Infants do not apparently have much episodic memory. What are they going to remember? I was in a warm place. And you selectively impair it, bullet in the hippocampus, too much alcohol, you lose hippocampal function, you lose the ability to form new memories of the past. The octopus appears to have this kind of memory that allows it to know its way around its territory, to learn which part of the aquarium it may be fed, to even recognize its caregivers and come up to the glass and greet them. Is this social behavior, or does he just want to eat them? We're not clear, but they're cute. Here are the brain structures that support different types of memory and experience. Procedural memory It's supported by the hypothalamus, which is good for reward learning. It's full of the homeostatic context, gives the homeostatic context of the animal. The basal ganglia used for decision, for action selection, and the amygdala that gives us the feelings that emphasize our decisions one way or another. The cortex and the cerebellum, with which we add valuation to stimuli and coordinate our motor outputs based on the selection. For semantic and episodic memories, the hippocampus and associated areas in the brain. Now, for procedural memory, the hypothalamus and the basal ganglia their functions are well represented in the sea slug's nervous system. These other things, we don't know. Maybe they're in the octopus. I bet they are. And for the episodic for the episodic memories, does the octopus have a hippocampal analog? We think it probably does. It's probably in the region that we call the vertical lobe of the animal's brain, but we'll find that out perhaps another time. But hippocampal function represents experience. It constructs an integrated cognitive map of spatial, temporal, and the associational context surrounding events. And you form memory in sequences and episodes of events in time and space. And it's necessary to recall those memory sequences. And recall of those memory sequences is very interesting. It forces us to reconsolidate those memories. So this is probably why many of our earliest memories may not be entirely accurate if we have to recall them and then reconsolidate them time after time. We're probably blurring the edges. And anyway, the hippocampus is a central focus for the representation of experience between our cortex and the associated structures like the amygdala, which give us our feelings and emotional expression, and the hypothalamus, which tells us our homeostatic context. Are we hungry? Are we thirsty? And how can I add value to these stimuli to give you incentive? Okay, so this is a simple. Let me explain this. This is we think the sea slug is just operating completely on procedural memory and what we would call that's wrong. Anoetic consciousness. Got to fix that. But it shows reward learning and foraging decisions. And what I'm showing you here is we have a small pleurobranchia. It's a fierce predator. And what we have here is one of the most beautiful sea slugs in California. It's called the Spanish shawl. It's bright purple and bright orange and serrata. So beautiful because this striking coloration is a warning. But pleurobranchia can't see. It doesn't know that these orange serrata sting. It just smells good to him or her, whatever it is. Grabs it. And we thought the first time we saw it spit the animal out, we were amazed. We'd never seen that before. It rejected the animal. It's doing rejection movements of the stinging orange serrata from its mouth. It turns away. It does this stereotypic aversive turn, puts its foot up, turns away up to 180 degrees, and puts it down and then slugs off at top speed. Okay, what goes on? Let's spend a little time. Half an hour later, we put these two back together. I want to show you what happens. Oh, the Spanish shawl is doing her flamenco dance of escape, but she's not going anywhere because there's no current in the aquarium. Let's continue. Put him back together. He gets the odor. And the sea slug, the pleurobranchia, remembers the problem with the Spanish shawl. And it avoids it. And it remembers this for a long time. It's very selective to the odor of the Spanish shawl. And it will avoid this animal for up to a week or more. So It's a negative reward learning. It also does positive reward learning. Here's the octopus, which I see you recall as a sea slug with some extra brain added on. It's got the same type of behavioral organization. It does the same kinds of computations for its economic decisions. It uses its ability to integrate sensation with its internal state and memory of experience to make its decision, and it's essentially calculating an aesthetic value of stimulation. It's a simple aesthetic ability, and it's modified by motivation. What we found a long time ago, back when I went to France to study the octopus, I had trouble teaching the octopus anything because it was too busy teaching me things. It was hard to teach them with shock because my octopus were all hungry. And when I tried to shock them with these electrodes, they would just attack the electrodes. And if I turned the shock off, they would go away. But if I turned it back on, they loved the pain. But then I fed them, and the octopus, who are no longer hungry, actively avoided the shock, and they actively avoided food. I was pretty startled to see that. I hadn't thought of that. And then we put it together and we said, my goodness, this can represent the computation of a very simple neural circuit that is doing a cost benefit computation for approach or avoidance of a stimulus. And here, hungry octopus attack a shock this long, and you feed them, they don't attack it at all. In fact, they will, and if you give them food, they'll actively push it away or squirt water at it through their siphons or actually retreat from it. So I told you we know all the circuitry for this in the sea slug. We know it really quite well. All the neural connections that cause approach and avoidance, the nature and expression of motivational state, and the effects of learning on this. And we put them together in a simple software model we called CyberSlug. And this is the title of the publication. And these are all the people who are on it. What I'd like to point out is that half of the authors of this paper were undergraduates. And they loved the project. So here's what we came up with. This is the logical depiction of our model. We have something like the hypothalamus, which is in this animal is the feeding network. It's the network that does the initiation and maintenance of the motor output of feeding. And its activity represents appetitive state. It also is modified by satiation. If it gets hungry, the appetitive state and the excitation state of this network go down. And this network, the output of this network, controls the decision for approach and avoidance of a stimulus. Okay? The default decision to a stimulus is to avoid it. But if you're hungry, then you suppress avoidance and release an approach. And we see this in the turning of the animal, turning away or turning towards a stimulus. And then we have sensory inputs that come in, and they are integrated into what we like to think of as incentive through the basic qualities of the sensory input. Does it taste good? Is it sweet? Is it umami? And the reward that is experienced that can cause the synapses mediating the effects of these stimuli to be reinforced or suppressed. And this is integrated into incentive, okay, which then comes and is added into the feeding network, which is integrating motivation, as internal state, and the stimulus qualities, and the effects of memory, which are put together in incentive. We also have the sensory stimuli going into a somatic map, which tells the animal which part of its body is being stimulated And then it uses this information as a template for motor output for the direction and the degree of a turn. Okay, this is just what we do, only if we use our eyes and our ears to orient towards stimuli or away from them. Okay, so here's the paper that was finally published. It was this was a lot of fun to do, and then here is the software that we came up with. We actually wrote this software in a simple system, a simple type of software called NetLogo, which is originally written for middle school students. And many, many people use this across the world to introduce people to coding. We did it because it's so simple and we can do these very simple graphics. Let me see if I can call up here is the operational software. We have this little slug slugging around, learning that the red dots are like the Spanish shawl and they're dangerous. It just avoided it. The green dots are delicious. It learns. It has a learning ability it learns to avoid the red dots and to eat the red dots, to eat the green dots. But if it is really super hungry, it will eat a red dot, which is a good idea. You know, if you're starving to death, then go ahead and eat the food that you don't like, because it might save you to find the food that perhaps you do. So that was the software. That was good. But then we have, well, this summarizes it. This what we call CyberSlug. It integrates sensation with motivation and memory to make the economic decision for approach or avoidance. And it does a very good job at optimized foraging. It has a basic aesthetic ability, the aesthetic ability that allows you to give value, plus or minus, about stimuli, the valence, the negative or positive, and how much. But it lacks the aesthetic sense that we have, that most animals have, the use dependence of behavior that you see in real animals, such as the characters that lead to boredom, novelty seeking, and addiction. I'll show you how that works. Here, the aesthetic sense is really quite broadly distributed in the animal kingdom. It's the subjective faculty that evaluates positive and negative qualities of situations, objects, and constructs, and biases decisions. Here's this beautiful little bowerbird in New Guinea, the Vogelkop, that spends months building this is a little male. He's building this huge structure and decorating it with found objects and putting them together in a way that Darwin, when he discovered this, said, well, these birds, this is the origin of beauty. We see it here. It's trying to attract a mate by putting together this beautiful representation. Therefore, it may well be that the origin of the sense of beauty, of aesthetics, was really based in reproductive physiology. We think that actually there's an earlier one, and that it's actually part of the foraging mechanism. So our question was, can we improve the aesthetic sense in CyberSlug? And I just want to remind you that the aesthetic sense is inborn. It's built into inherited feature detector circuits. It's adapted to circumstances with reward learning and your motivational state. Aesthetic sense probably originated very early in generalist foragers that had to be active in varying conditions that required reward learning to adapt, and they used it to estimate the costs and benefits of actions when they're hunting prey. Now, what we have here is a little baby octopus that has just hatched about oh, 20 minutes ago. It's never eaten. And Andrew and Alex, who are doing this, put a baby guppy in with it. That's the guppy sitting there. The octopus really doesn't notice the guppy. It's just looking for anything to eat. It's starving. It's very dangerous time for a baby octopus. What it's really tuned to is motion. It will not eat anything that does not move. Look at that. Look at that inherited behavior. Every time it does this, it's better and better and better. So this is what we did. Okay, this is the work of Mariani and Katja, and we have the basic organization of behavior here. But then Katja has invented a new module, the HRC, which stands for the homeostatic reward circuit. It takes the reward output from this hypothalamic analog and feeds it back in a negative feedback way. And it operates on the reward input such that in this simple neural network model, there's a synapse, a connection here that with use becomes weaker and weaker. Okay? And what this does is we call the output of this back to the feeding network the reward experience. Okay? So the reward experience changes with use. This is the paper we finally published. This was a fun paper to write, I think, because of the reviewers it went to. One reviewer was an expert on the nature of the aesthetic sense, and the second reviewer was an expert in addiction. And we really had to learn a lot to satisfy their criticisms and demands. And we renamed this from the CyberSlug. We renamed this new software Asimov, and we put together a justification of a really pretty clumsy abbreviation, but we liked the word Asimov as the science fiction author who was one of the first to treat the ethics of robotics. And this is what it looked like. This is the little sea slug now, CyberSlug in the Asimov environment. And it has gone through a point where it has learned that the red dots are bad, the blue dots are good. But then in the middle of the setting here, we added in the yellow dots, which are like an addictive drug. They have a super high reward. How many of you have ever been addicted to something? How many of you, any smokers? How about coffee? I know some of you are really addicted to coffee, perhaps tea. And then have you ever gone through withdrawal when you quit it? Was it fun? What about social relationships, which are super addictive? How did you feel the last time you were dumped? That's withdrawal. Grief, things like this. These are all connected with this, all connected to your aesthetic sense, the deprivation of a highly rewarding stimulus that then causes a vacuum. This is what happens to CyberSlug in the middle of this. It's learning to eat the blue dots. This is the incentive. It learns the incentive is very good. Then you add in the drug and you go, wow, oh my God, this is awesome. This is awesome. And then you take it away. And look at what happens to the reward experience. You feel terrible. And the animal begins eating everything in sight. And then it comes back and it recovers. But everything recovers, but there remain what are analogous to cravings. As soon as it gets back in the context of seeing this highly rewarding stimulus, then it will go right back on it. So what's happening in the simulation, as happens in real life, is that addiction arises from the mechanism of aesthetics if you present extreme rewards repeatedly. And we see this not only in human beings where we notice it the most, but also a variety of invertebrates have been showing addictive behavior in the laboratory. They don't actually smoke like this crayfish. You probably picked it up from hanging around in bad company. So the addictive process involves desensitization to the reward. You take enough of this drug and it doesn't give you the same high anymore. You take more of it. And then when you take it away, you go into withdrawal and you recover and you resensitize, but you still got prolonged cravings. And these first three are the cause of homeostatic plasticity, that use-dependent decrease in strength in the reward experience circuit, the HRC circuit. And the prolonged cravings, that's what you're left with the reward learning. So here again, here's what happens during the reward. Look, here we've added the drug, and look at the reward experience goes up, but then before it can find another reward, it goes into these little mini withdrawals, right? It's like you smoked a cigarette 10 minutes ago, but I really feel like having another cigarette. 10 minutes, you're a 3-pack a day person. And then there's the withdrawal. Okay, so you can get this from the internet. It's free on GitHub. Just Google Asimov and you'll find it. And you could put it on your own computer, play with the code. It's really accessible. So now we're at the point where we ask, how could we develop a more elaborate aesthetic sense, and one that could be used in synthetic creativity, for instance, to modify the niche that you're living in, to build a nest, a complicated nest, to use a tool, or perhaps actually think of a design that you could, using memory that you've acquired during your experience, that you could implement in the future. So what do you need? Well, we really need to take the cyber slug and enhance the mechanisms for sensory coding and attention. It'd be nice to have vision, wouldn't it? It'd be nice to have really good proprioception and the like. And we'd like to enhance the memory, encoding, and retrieval. If only we had a hippocampus. And then we'd like to enhance the animal's body so we could have complex motor output and more elaborate interactions with the environment. Fortunately, Katja seems to have figured out a lot. She has put together a model of memorizing a sequence, which is a function like the hippocampus does, just as memorizing a sequence. She's put together something we call the feature association matrix based on matrix algebra. And what it does, it allows an animal to learn a combination, the sequence of combinations of inputs, right? And it does this on the basis of, watch, if it goes by these 3 odors in the environment, it causes the representation, a slow decay of these odors, each of which can overlap and be associated, especially if a reward results from following these odors. Okay? And what we have here then in the feature association matrix is a memory of the sequence of stimuli, odor stimuli that it encountered, right? And it's based on the strength of the stimuli, and the overlap between the inputs, what we call the eligibility traces. If you're taking our 462 course, you'll know all about that. And the order of stimuli, which input is first and second, and the expected reward. How close in the sequence are the inputs to a reward? Okay, so this is doing what the hippocampus does, but with a lot less need for computational power. For one thing, we don't have to, with this simple matrix, feature association matrix, we don't have to calculate the spiking in the neural networks. And this is similar to the computation that it does for the inputs from the entorhinal cortex to the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus to the CA3 area. We memorize the sequence. We annotate the salience of this in the CA1 area with input from the reward centers of the ventral tegmental area and the locus coeruleus. So we could ask, okay, so we're pluribranchia. We just live for the moment. Why would we want to evolve an episodic memory? Well, if you're like a pluribranchia, you're well protected and you don't really have to hide out too much, and food is plentiful, you don't really need to. But if you need to exploit new resources, perhaps it will be useful to you to map your territory, to find out the spatial features in the territory and where the food might be hanging out, the reward. And you can go, if you can go home, you can do some niche construction, some modification of your environment, dig a hole and live in it. Huh, that's creative synthesis, right? Dig a hole and live in it. You can even decorate it. You can have camouflage it like octopus do. And then if you have the ability for spatial memory, then you learn your environment, you can go where the food is and find your way back home. Because once you've eaten the food, it's a good idea to go hide away and turn that food into reproductive potential before some other predator is going to take care of you. So here's the software as it stands for the moment. Here's pre-stimuli. It goes through the first two, finds a reward, the yellow one. The first two have no consequence, but it loves the reward. Okay, it finds its way to the reward based on knowing the sequence of stimuli here. You can do it from either side. Actually, a pretty good associative learning. It can come in from any angle and find its way to the reward. Here's the feature association matrix operating from moment to moment. Here's all the prey that's been eaten and the incentive that the animal's experiencing and what's happening to its reward experience. Okay, not much of an effect here because we really haven't put in. So that's where we are here. That's project one, right? How far can we go? This is so far where we are. What we'd like to do now is put in a path integration ability, which Katya seems to have under control, that will allow you to learn your way around an environment without the stimuli being right next to each other, where you can go from one to the next to the next. But if you remember where you are in the environment, you can find your way to the reward just by knowing which way your head is pointed in space with respect to your spatial surroundings. So That seems to be next, and it looks like it's going to work out quite well. How far can we take this? It looks like we could go a long way. I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. It's totally fun. So the next thing we'd like to do, this is down the road, and we've only just begun to think about this, is how can we tune motor control? And these are the sorts of things I think that you want to think about with the miniature brain machinery. In our future plans, we'd like to use very simple bare bones circuits for what you call recurrent inhibition, which is the basic type of neural circuit that the brain uses for its very, very sophisticated computations based on very simple circuits of inhibition. These appear in embryogenesis, and they are tuned. They are tuned in embryogenesis by feedback from the periphery to give appropriate outputs. We think that we're playing with the idea that we can do this with in an analogous way to the effects of reward learning on the economic decision. For instance, we think that the neuromodulators that are so important in the maturation of spinal circuits during embryogenesis may give us some important clues. For instance, serotonin, but the inhibitory neurons of, say, the central pattern generator for locomotion is formed quite early in the spinal cord, but it's really immature. It really doesn't show the patterned alternating excitation of the two sides that cause the alternating excitation of extensors and flexion that give us the step cycle. But as soon as serotonergic neurons, 5-HT neurons, grow into the spinal cord, down from the raphe and the hindbrain, then these inhibitory neurons suddenly acquire the ability to inhibit each other and then activate an alternating output. Now, this alternating output causes twitches of muscles. Twitches of muscles. When muscles move, they activate sensors that are either embedded in the muscle or in the environment when your foot hits the side of the crib or something. And these sensory afferents feed back into the spinal cord. And we think it's one possibility is that they're activating some neuromodulatory center from up in the hindbrain that may feed back down and cause the maturation of these inputs in a way very possibly like happens in reward learning. And actually, this may be the type of mechanism from which actual reward learning evolved with some minor modifications. We're looking at this and we're open to everything, but this seems like a very valuable avenue to travel up. So that's it. And I guess I'll just end with, I think that we could, you could play with the scheme yourself, and you might be able to add a few elements if you can get this model to work to simulate a circuit to mimic procedural learning, perhaps to ride a bicycle. Okay? And then I'll leave you here with some fashion interest in cephalopods that I've often enjoyed looking at. Lady Gaga's imitation of the creature from the depths, and the squid contessa, and so forth. So thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to me. I think we have time for a few questions if you'd like to tell me. Criticisms, whatever. Lay it on me.
Hi, Rhanor.
Tahir, hi.
Sorry, I have to put my mask because there are other people around here.
Nice.
Is there any way to test the last hypothesis that you just mentioned in vitro?
I'm sure there is. In fact, I think
How
that's,
would you
you know,
define the
what
punishment?
you're missing in the miniature brain machinery is neuromodulators. You've got things like BDNF and the little signals that go between astrocytes and neurons that are doing really, really interesting things and getting some really interesting morphology. But the pattern output, I think, you know, what if you were able to put in an electrode and deliver something like serotonin to periodically, perhaps to reinforce some pattern? Or what if you were to actually, when you're building your little miniature brains, what if you took a little piece from the raphe nuclei, where the serotonin comes from, and let it grow up with them? I mean, there are things that there's just a lot of possibilities. And I think looking at things like these neurons you're having, they probably got lots of interesting serotonin receptors, norepinephrine receptors, dopamine receptors, all the things that we think are important in reward learning. And in,
what would be a punishment?
What would be a punishment?
Yeah.
Golly, you know what? It's just it's something you're feeling your way. And so I'd say, you know, nothing happens unless you make a manipulation. And then that's going to tell you something. You may start out with a hypothesis and something completely different will happen and you'll learn from it. And that it's just a wonderful set of experiments that you guys can do.
Yeah, in fact, we were talking with Gene, we were thinking of whether pheromone could be a punishment that they see in the bee.
Well, what is aversive? What would cause these? You really need a circuit, right?
Yeah.
You need a circuit that causes pain,
yeah.
that causes some sort of avoidance behavior.
Yeah, or stress.
Right, that's what pain is all about. What?
Or some kind of a stress.
Well, you want avoidance.
Yeah.
Right, and when we're talking about stress, we're talking about psychic pain there. You're a long way from that, right?
Yeah, something that they don't like, yeah.
Well, yeah, but we have to get a circuit where they will like things. So, but if let's stick with simple procedural memory and anoetic consciousness, where what is approach of avoidance in a miniature brain in one of these culture dishes? You're going to have to define that. Well, you know, you're just feeding them. They're just sort of like an embryo there with no experience, and they're really not specified, as most parts of our nervous system are to show some sort of economic behavior or detect specific features and the like. I think the first thing to do is just put in some of those neuromodulators and see what happens. And the idea that they're going to like or dislike something, that's a long way away.
We can of course read out from their firing pattern though, which might tell us. Right.
I think they're going to tell you what they like or don't like long before you guess it. It's what you're doing is really exciting.
Okay, I'll stop and let others chiming in.
Thank you.
Do the octopus show evidence of aesthetics?
Well, I think so. I'll tell you what, you know, these animals are slightly venomous, the species we're working with. And we had one case where someone was actually using an arm here and there. They would anesthetize the octopus and then you take an arm for physiological studies, and the octopus didn't like this, and they actually tried to bite this person. So I think that certainly is the indication of an aesthetic. I mean, how do you like having an arm amputated? Eek. So we're very careful with that now. And I think they show an aesthetic in, you know, it changes with their motivational state. When they're very, very hungry, they seem to like pain. And of course, what do they normally eat? They eat crabs. What do crabs do when they don't want to be eaten? They pinch you and stick you with their sharp little legs. And that just provokes the hungry octopus into extreme effort to subdue the crab. It's very, very advantageous to do that sort of thing. I think this is a basic aesthetic. You know, an aesthetic is not just walking into the art museum and say, oh, I've seen that so often. I'm tired of that. It's on some new phase in art. But it's very, very basic. And I think it's originating in foraging behavior. You learn preferences and aversions and your aesthetic sense. We could call it something else, but that's it. We could call it, it's an evaluative, hedonic sort of a thing. But I think everyone can resonate with aesthetics, although at the first time that they hear it, they may say, oh, no, that's really too human, but it ain't. Thank you.